Rafael Maretto, sorry, connected with us via phone. So maybe I'd like to give the floor to him because we know that the connection is a bit complicated. If you agree, Rafael, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Cordial greetings. Okay, first slide I sent it for you for maneuvering because of you and resorting the phone. And the title is Governed and Ungoverned War Zones within Ukraine and Russia revised vis-a-vis the role of IGOs and member states. I'm a research member to the shock unit of the RUSI, but this is my professional perceptions of my presentation of my field applied, not field applied, my applied research, you know. But this does not reflect this institution RUSI per se. Well, so you can move to the next slide, please. The war in Ukraine has become very troublesome month after month since its onset, which was very shocking to us all. And despite the title, which is very focused on the war zones and somehow governed or not governed territories, the major focus here is to try to claim the attention of the international security community of experts to map and assess who is in the field, who is playing the spoilers in the field, namely non-stated army groups and also organized criminal groups. What does not necessarily mean is like Ukrainian-based or Russian-based, as for inputs from the field, from Ukrainians mainly, like the difference between the sharp difference between nowadays battalion brigade, Azov big brigade, and the Wagner group, which is the two sides like most spotlighted as paramilitary, or the Wagner group is acting globally, everyone knows that, and within the war zones, and also the brigade of the Azov, which is based in the city of Azov, of course, and is part now of since 2014. From 2014 to date, has become part of the Ukrainian National Force, armed forces. But actually, the point is that as there is a very wise quotation from an expert, forgot her name now. It's very well known. It's that the war are very nightmarish to most of us, but are the perfect time for all possible organized criminal groups and non-stated army groups that are not necessarily based in Ukraine or in Russia, in any of the core belligerent, or be it the invasioner or the invaded nation, but all globally and transcontinentally ones are for sure operational in the Black Sea via the Mediterranean Sea, and I have some just like two examples like of this. And the last year's second semester in South America, unfortunately I cannot inform the secret source you have, unfortunately, because it's an open event, and but ammunitions and arms, not have weaponry arms, have been registered as arriving in South America, from which were supposedly to be deployed to defend Ukraine from the aggressors, and they arrived in South America in last years. All have that not nationally or regionally. They all linkage with why there are own illegal alliances, and they profit from acquire arsenals of ammunitions, arms, heavy weaponry, and also legal and illegal goods. All kinds of smuggling people, all kinds of illegal corridors they take all the momentum to seize the opportunity, because once again the field is not properly monitored. So this is the worst side of a war-torn nation, because no one is constantly in the field. And even now changing slightly the scope when it comes to the role of IGOs, like we have the UN and the several bodies of the UN, like trying to make several attempts for more than 1 year and a half, and it does not go through. It stops, and lots of serious problematic intervals like OCHA or the Department of Political Affairs or the Security Council resolutions or the General Assembly resolutions trying to foster peace, but it works reversely, unfortunately. So the UN is also becoming more and more hindered. We had a very punctual mission of the UN mission led by the world-known Argentinian diplomat Rafael Mariano Grossi, was in charge of verification of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, but it was they didn't manage to because it was surrounded by Russian armed forces, or the Wagner, we never know who actually precisely do not know who were in charge of the security of blocking the access to verification of this nuclear plant, which one of the second or not the third most powerful nuclear power plant operation nowadays in Europe. And this is so problematic because it comes and goes, and we have the Gulf Cooperation Council as well as another NGO. We have member states like the PRC, the People's Republic of China, which is speculated as well as deploying lots of weaponry unilaterally denominated Balkan southern flank, which is making we have not precision, but like infiltrating the war zones and fostering the spoilers to make all these wars. And we also have, of course, NATO. NATO is deploying a lot of weaponry for Ukraine, for itself. Ukraine is not a member of the NATO, but it's within the European territory, so it's collective security. The Article 5 knows that. But the problem is that after the ousting of the Minister of Defense of Ukraine due to schemes of corruptions or any other more complex issues that came up to us all, NATO make a slight interval to monitor the capacity of the Ukrainian armed forces in the field and the war zone fields to maneuver and train then to use these weapons being deployed to them for self-defense, because there was a momentum that's already gone, or a reason that is even the NATO that was not safe enough, like to say, like, are we fostering the peace or forcing the defense of Ukraine for peace, or are we empowering wrong people, perhaps without knowing that they're wrong people and not able to monitor and surveillance or even utilize the weapons due to lack of capabilities to train them to maneuver the high-tech weaponry. The slide is very long. It's very extensive because it's a research paper. It's evolving week after week. It's non-stop. It's all working on this, but and also the migrant flows, no? Because they have this absolutely lack. This is my to sum up it is to claim the international attention. Please, we have so much weapon being delivered, like for so many months after year after 1 year already, and it does not suffice, and it has become a problem not of solely the Ukraine security. It has become a first problem of European security, and then a global security due to these illegal spoilers, armed spoilers, because these weapons are being circulating all over the globe, because these non-state armed actors and organized criminal groups, they do like this. They take all the momentum, they exchange the weapons and the munitions, all kinds of possible goods for revenues to acquire more power, arsenal, and they play reversely. They take it. They make alliances with vulnerable communities within the ports in Ukraine or southern Russia, Black Sea, or in neighboring states as well. And they coerce, and the vulnerable communities, they have no choice left but to just to forcibly cope, or sometimes sometimes they join live on a rational basis, on a rational choice basis, unfortunately, and they cope via corruption schemes. And these weapons, they have become already a problem of international security, not restricted to Russia or Ukraine or to Europe. It's all over the Africa. Northern African states are reportedly already being registering like Ukrainian weaponry and ammunition delivery for the defense of Ukraine in the hands of failed states in northern Sahel Africa and Sahara region in Africa. So also in the Middle East. So it's very complicated, because it's also to finalize this. Governed territories, the capital, okay, but even the capital is in the outskirts, in the periphery. It's not that controlled. It's very complicated, as everybody knows. Most of the refugees, it's very appalling, the number of refugees, millions of refugees, which is are unfortunately hindered in neighbor states like such as Poland and other neighbor states that are refusing the refugees for Ukraine, because Europe no longer is unfortunately not able to integrate so many refugees from so many war zones from all over the world sequentially. Since the onset of this was the war in Syria Arab Republic to date, and now the Ukrainians, and previously the Afghans as well. So they're becoming blocked. So it's very complicated, because the Ukrainians, they cannot come back, and they become blocked, and they cannot become integrated. So it's a problem that Morgana will talk about. This human trafficking, human smuggling as well. So this is all, dear panel and dear attendees as well. And one last remark, I would like to say this: I would be very thankful to all these Ukrainian-based colleagues and global fellows over the attention of the battalion Azov. It's now part of the Ukrainian forces. But yes, I researched that this transition of becoming formalized on official armed forces, but it's a very controversial, because for so many years and to date, still there's some states that regard them.
Sorry to interrupt you, so that we can have 15 minutes each. Is it possible to come back on this issue in a second intervention, so that we can let speak also the other panelists?
Sure. That's all. I spoke a lot, and let's leave the floor for the next speaker, and then I conclude with my other points. But
Thanks a lot. So let's go to Tatiana Melnichuk. She's a criminologist, an associate professor at the Department of Criminal Procedure at the National University in Odessa. Well, I have a question on myself. ODS has always played an important role due to its favorable geographical location. But what has changed with the war? How have Ukrainian, Russian, European criminal groups taken advantage of the situation? Can you explain us something more about this issue?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please let me start with my presentation, and maybe in the end of it, I will be able to answer your question. One moment, please. I'm trying to open this presentation. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm pleased to present a brief overview of the criminal situation related to Russian war in Ukraine and shed light to the most controversial challenges of organized crime research and counteraction under martial law regime. First of all, it should be noted that the full-scale war in Ukraine started in February 2022 is still ongoing. Day-to-day hostilities resulted in more than 10,000 killed civilians, numerous war crimes, destroyed infrastructure, and territories suffering from occupation. As for me, I am one of the millions of Ukrainians who had to flee seeking temporary protection in a foreign country. The paradox of organized crime is that organized crime groups always prefer stable and safe jurisdictions with weak institutions and a corrupt background. But at the same time, due to its high adaptive capacity, organized crime makes the best use of social upheaval to extract profits and benefits. And the large-scale invasion has confused the cards for many criminal groups in and outside Ukraine because of disrupting the established schemes and networks of illegal trade, but at the same time gave the new opportunities to organized crime that we can call the harvest of war. At the beginning of the war, the logistics-dependent forms of crime have experienced the greatest turbulence. Infrastructure facilities of airspace, railway, ports, and roads became the key areas that suffered the heaviest attacks. Nevertheless, the demand for illicit goods is still relevant as ever, and in some cases has even increased in the times of the war. Due to the closed airspace and seaports, the main smuggling routes were relocated and shifted to the western southwestern borders of Ukraine. In addition to changes to relatively traditional markets, the war has led to the emergence of new markets, such as market of black grain, smuggling of conscripts, and trading humanitarian aid, including military ammunition. According to our observations, one of the latest trends is using Ukrainian citizens who have temporary protection in one of the European countries as money mules or mules for illicit markets. But illegal trade is only the peak of an iceberg. In Ukraine, along with traditional organized crime groups, there are groups very close to state and local authorities. Basically, they do not associate themselves with the criminal world, but they have organized modus operandi and concentration mainly in economic sphere. With the beginning of the war, economy in Ukraine has come to a standstill. At the same time, the budgetary sphere and public procurement under martial law became the areas of increased criminal risk. The largest share of all detected in economic sphere organized criminal groups were operating in this sector. The risks, first of all, are caused by the possibility to purchase goods or services beyond open auctions. In fact, the state orders for defense sector contain very sensitive state or military information, and due to the obvious reasons should be removed from the public access. Auctions in electronic procurement system called ProZorro in Ukraine cannot properly function due to constant shelling of energy infrastructure. This resulted in headline making criminal schemes involving high-level authorities. Since March 2014, the European Union and the wider international community have progressively imposed a broad range of measures on organizations and individuals, including financial measures, trade sanctions, travel bans, assets freezing in order to weaken aggressors' capacities for war. Depending on the type of sanction imposed, target sanctions have used a variety of illicit mechanisms to circumvent them. Methods used include, let's say, primitive schemes, for example, Transship Group that transported illegally mined coal from temporary occupied territories through Russian and Ukrainian ports just before their full-scale war. And also they include the advanced tools such as concealment of beneficial ownership, use of intermediaries and fraudulent documents, and also the relocation of movable assets. Over the past year, there have been reports of individuals detected in European countries or attempting to enter the EU from Ukraine in possession of a significant amount of cash. Although the origin of the money couldn't be established, it is suspected that they are related to criminal assets or sanction evasion. In addition to cash transactions, cryptocurrencies are also likely to be used in money laundering schemes related to evasion of sanctions, for example, through BitZlato platform. This war is a hybrid war. Dissemination of disinformation and organized propaganda became also a weapon. Creating of global multi-channel propaganda platforms in mass and social media is the manifest of its organized nature. Also, certain criminal groups which originate from pseudo-republics formed in Ukrainian eastern regions in 2014 are the actors of public information activities related to glorification of war. There are a lot of evidence of organized propaganda at temporarily occupied territories, particularly in educational institutions. Propaganda is not the news in mass media. It's tasked not to supply an information. Its main goal to provoke the needed emotion, fear and hate, and the forms are usually either support of Russian aggression and military actions or hate of Ukrainians, calling to killings and in fact to genocide. Ukrainian organized crime has always been associated with Russian organized crime, probably because of the legacy of the common Soviet past. The influence of Russian organized crime was indeed significant, from close cooperation flourishing since 1990s to participation of Russian criminal groups in annexation of Crimea and formation of pseudo-republics in eastern regions. Russian aggression has disrupted these ties, although we have no enough evidence-based facts to completely exclude some occasional interactions, but the separation is undoubtful. From the point of view of law, in the time of the war, the cooperation between Ukrainian and Russian organized crime transformed from the problem of public security, actually from the problem of organized crime itself, to the problem of state or national security. One thing is to be known as gangsters with accusation of extortion or illegal drug trading. Completely other situation to be regarded as collaborators. Ukrainian organized crime was not eager to have such a stigma or face the responsibility for collaboration. The complexity of organized crime problematic requires the reliable information that could be provided by the research of high quality. The war has brought a complex cocktail of change in which old approaches to studying criminal manifestations do not work. Contradictory evidence is received about the situation and changes in organized crime during the war, both from official and alternative sources of information. This is due to methodological gaps, for example, in research of illegal arms trafficking and a lack of information, especially from the areas of hostilities. There are also challenges for criminal justice and preventive policies. And one of the main of them is that investigation of criminal offenses, the so-called war crimes, has become a priority over general criminal offenses, and the activity of law enforcement agencies shifted accordingly. By this time, more than 100,000 criminal proceedings have been initiated on the facts of crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine by members of Russian Federation armed forces. It is possible that organized crime will emerge from the war much stronger, and the stabilization of situation and recovery of Ukraine after the war will largely depend on the ability of the criminal justice system to ensure law and order and to implement proactive measures to prevent possible outbreaks of organized crime. Thank you very much for your attention. Your questions are welcome.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And now we have Olena Shostko, Doctor of Law, full professor, criminologist, and professor at various universities. The floor is yours. Olena, we cannot hear you. Maybe you should...
Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Dear colleagues, it's a great honor for me to be at this virtual conference and share my some idea about organized crime in time of Russia's large-scale war against Ukraine. But now you cannot see my screen. Oh.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Couple of reflections about the war. As you know, in early 2014, the Russian Federation annexed Crimea and occupied certain territories in the east of Ukraine. Last year, on February 24, Russia began a full-scale military invasion against my country. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. You can see it in the next slide, please. And I am an internally displaced person. Next slide, please. This is what my native city, Kharkiv, looks like after Russia brutal missile attack on civilian infrastructure. Now let's return to topic. I'd like to continue Tatiana's thoughts and stress that organized crime has, as a rule, two realities. Officially recorded and the smallest part, and latent unregistered organized crime, which can be investigated by indirect methods about expert surveys, material of investigative journalists, international rating. Next slide, please. Firstly, let's consider how the war impacts the scale of domestic organized crime activity. I just noticed that many features of organized crime during Russia's large-scale invasion are still unknown. But primarily, I would like to give you some trends of organized crime through official statistics. In this slide, you can see that since 2016 until 2021, the number of disclosed organized criminal groups has risen. Number of convicted members is almost same. In 2022, we monitor a decrease of 21% of detected organized criminal groups and 28% suspects compared to the previous year, while the level of recorded general crime increased by almost 13% in 2022. We also observe the gaps between the suspects, members of organized criminal groups, and convicts in 8 times in last year. Next slide, please. Number of detected organized criminal groups with corruption links decreased. The percentages is only 9 out of all total organized criminal groups. We have observing a vicious circle. Law enforcement incapable to dismantle the most dangerous criminal organization. And some corrupt and dishonest representatives of police and other state agencies cover up their activities. Next slide, please. The level of disclosed organized criminal groups with transnational links more or less the same in last year, but it makes up only 2.5% from all quantity of disclosed organized criminal groups in 2022. Next slide, please. Concerning characteristics of convicted person, we see considerable decrease in conviction rate for all crimes since 2015. In 2022, only 0.4% of all convicts in Ukraine were organized crime offenders. We may confirm that official reports don't reflect the real scope and trends of organized crime. It shows mostly the ability of law enforcement agencies to detect obvious crimes in criminal activities. Ukrainian law enforcement agencies are involved in detection war crimes in the first place, as Tatiana told also. 1/5 of the courts don't work now due to the war. Some personnel of the law enforcement agency are defending the country. Further, I'd like to draw attention to the role of the state aggressor as a collective criminal. Please, next slide. Thank you. Numerous Ukrainian and international reports have indicated that Russian military will engage in the forced relocation of thousands of Ukrainians, including children, to Russia. In filtration camps in occupied areas of Ukraine, they were deprived of documents and forced to take Russian passport. Russian authorities forcibly separate some Ukrainian children from their parents and gave the children to Russian families. It's the state policy of Russia. As you know, for such activities, in March 2023, the International Criminal Court in The Hague issued the arrest warrant for Russian president and the Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights. Ukrainian NGO reports that, for example, car mechanics are kidnapped in the occupied territories and forced to do slave labor for the repair of military equipment, as well as civilians are forcing to dig trenches. So we conclude that Russia commit crimes which is essence organized crime that increase the global criminal market. Cultural heritage. It must be mentioned, Russian thefts of Ukrainian cultural heritage started taking place since the beginning of the armed aggression in 2014. In January 2023, Poland's cultural minister wanted that Ukraine's cultural heritage could be looted and traded in illegal markets as a result of the Russian invasion. We may identify certain distinctive features of looting cultural objects during the war in Ukraine, industrial scale of stealing cultural heritage, and organized and performed by the Russian state bodies and military units. Stealing Ukrainian grain and farm products, metal, other Ukrainian assets. I'd like to stress the fourth Geneva Convention of 1949 and the Hague Conventions explicitly forbid the looting of civilian property during wartime. But Russia has stolen 6 million tons of grain from the occupied territories of Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale war. According to US report on the impact of the Russian invasion on food security, the American expert formed this conclusion about stealing and theft of Ukrainian grain based on satellite images and data from open sources. Next slide, please. The occupied territories of Ukraine, some publication of well-known scholars, analytical materials are indicated that in these territories of Ukraine have been flourishing criminal trade. These territories have become some of segments of transnational network of criminal business. Next slide, please. For example, in temporarily occupied Mariupol, have already created at least 2 ethnic gangs consist of guest workers from Central Asia countries. These gangs involved in arms and drug trafficking, smuggling, and illicit transportation and construction. The occupiers brought more than 25,000 construction workers from the Russian Federation and Central Asian countries to Mariupol. And last question that I would like to highlight, illicit trafficking of weapons. Next slide, please. From time to time, there were occasional publications on alleged cases of illicit smuggling, export of weapons from Ukraine. For example, in an article about the Finnish police, it was asserted that weapons destined for Ukraine could end up in the hands of criminal groups in Europe. But later, the Finnish police reported the absence of confirmed information of any specific facts of the supply of contraband weapons from Ukraine. The Finnish ambassador in Kyiv also did not confirm the information published in Finnish media. Europol also denied arms smuggling from Ukraine in 2022 after its statement of the alleged smuggling of weapons out of Ukraine during the war. International organizations also have not fixed an increase in illicit arms trade from Ukraine in 2022 and 2023. According to the EU statement at the working group on firearms in Vienna in May 2023, the European Union does not observe large-scale illicit trafficking in weapons in Ukraine against the background of the war. We may conclude that this topic and corresponding publication turned out to be a fake. Evidently, there is one of the manifestation information campaign to discredit Ukraine by the Russian Federation. I stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we have Morgana Bettega-Gazabin from Jagiellonian University. And if is it possible, I'd like, you have studied also in Poland. I'd like to know something, if is it possible, about the way of this war has created the instability in Poland and other countries. If you can tell us something about that.
Yes, for sure. Hello. Good evening for everyone. Good morning, depending on the time zone. Let me share my screen first. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Perfect.
So since we already have a very, very good and complete background on the war itself, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the vulnerability of women in armed conflict areas in general, but then a little bit more specific in Ukraine as well. So we can just very specifically a little bit on gender, then the conflict areas, and then lastly in Ukraine. So about the human trafficking in general, it is one type of the transnational organized crime that directly affects the life of millions of people worldwide. And it is a violation of human rights by specific means, and they result in the displacement of people and the exploitation, both domestically and also internationally. It got more intensified the focus on this type of transnational crime with the human trafficking specifically in the early 1990s. And this was due to the trafficking of women and girls for sexual exploitation, and later expanding the understanding of human trafficking and other sources of exploitation in general with the end of the Cold War. So with this, we can see that the globalization that came after, with it, the easier transportation, connections, and access, and this development resulted in increased the migration, and it facilitated the creation of trafficking nets. And these added to the scenario of fragility and instability of the reformulation of Eastern European states with the end of the Cold War, brought international attention to the topic. So the international community became more aware of it. And so the start of the regulations was in 1949 with the Trafficking Convention, and more specifically in the 2000s, with the United Nations Conventions Against Transnational Organized Crimes, that was implemented a protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, and that is also referred as the Palermo Protocol. And as of 2020, this convention has 190 parties, and of those, 178 have ratified the Trafficking in Persons Protocol, and the majority of them have already implemented domestic legislations that are according to the protocol, which is a good way of seeing this being implemented in the states themselves. And just to be a little bit more defined about the human trafficking itself, it has three main points that are the actions, and those are the methods of movement, so how to transport these people, the means, so how are they going to get these people, by fraud, by force, coercion, or any other methods, and the goal, so like what is the exploitation purpose of this victim. Here we can see that the victims, they can be separated by the form of exploitation. Most of them are for sexual exploitation or forced labor. And here we can see the same. Through the years, we have a little bit of a shift, but still sexual exploitation and labor are the main reasons. When it comes to gender and to the victims, the women and girls that are being victims in themselves, in human trafficking, the women, they can take part not only as victims, but also as perpetrators, facilitators, and activists. And the gender marginalization occurs in many different aspects in society. Women have less access to education, work, financial stability, political participation, and there are regions where all of these issues are combined. And this can make women and girls more accessible victims, and their position in society increases their vulnerability. And the main difference for the purpose of human trafficking depends on gender. So men and boys are usually trafficked for labor exploitation. It demands usually hard work, force, participation in conflicts as child soldiers, for example. And women and girls are usually exploited as lighter form of labors, such as domestic servitude, for example, farming and sexual exploitation, sexual slaves, child brides, and babe factories. It's also important to consider the marginalization of women and girls that are unempowered, a position in a societal group. And it can be because of characteristics of race, economic class, or also due to human rights. So if women's rights are restricted, it can also be a factor that make them more vulnerable for that. When we think about the conflict areas in specific, we can think of the geopolitical factors that can contribute to the development of illegal activities that can be, for example, human trafficking in this case. And some regions, they can be more propense to be receivers of trafficked persons. Other can be abduction sites of these trafficked persons, or both. They can be both a high end of abductions and receiving of these trafficked persons, these victims. Human trafficking is in general a factor that can be domestic, but it can happen within the borders of one country, but it can also cross international borders and be transnational. It does not necessarily need to happen this border crossing in order to consider a person a victim of human trafficking in general. And we can consider fragile states. So the Fragile State Index, it uses data generated by the Fund for Peace, and this focuses on the economic development and human security as a measure. With this index, it features normal pressures forced by the states and recognizes the ones that could send a state towards failing. So the states that have higher ranking in this, they're more vulnerable to failing. So they are states that are less stable. And it aims to evaluate the political risks and the possible conflicts and make them available for legislators and for the public in general. And it is important to highlight the inequalities of society, so the gaps of development, risk situation of marginalized groups, and the large discrepancies of wealth that can make a community more vulnerable to violence and to crimes. And this can also make it more prone to human trafficking. And the stratification of society between a small privileged group of people and the exploited mass form the distribution of power, wealth, and status that can help set regimens. So the more that we see like this difference within the state, it's more likely that they're going to be fragile. And in 2018, the UN Global Report on Trafficking in Persons can categorize the armed conflict by protected armed confrontations between two or more states, between a governmental armed forces of one or more armed groups within a state. So with this, the trafficking in this context, it can be direct. So it can be when part of the brutality and the malice is perpetrated by parts of the conflict. And this means that trafficking of human beings are occurring in the area that hostilities are happening, so within the areas of the conflicts. And they're done by armed groups or other players involved in these hostilities directly or indirectly when traffickers target people that are in vulnerable situations due to the conflict as victims, and it can happen during or post the conflict. So not only while the conflict is happening, but as the aftermath develops as well. And it affects even people that are escaping or leaving the area and surrounding communities by proxy. We can see this a lot for people that are trying to escape the country, people that are trying to escape these areas of conflict. And we can also see it a lot in refugees. So not only in refugee sites and camps, but some perpetrators can try to convince people that they are going to help them cross borders, something like that, and actually end up abducting them. And these people, they're very vulnerable because they're trying to escape the situation, which make them a lot more susceptible for this kind of luring than in other areas that are not in armed conflicts. Okay, so with the case of Ukraine, in this case, it's considered one good measure is the U.S. Department of State Trafficking in Persons report, and they have tiers into which they consider the efforts of the country against human trafficking in general. And what is interesting here is that Ukraine was able to keep the tier that it had been in. So 2019, 2020 with the pandemic, and even with the war in 2022, and now in the report in 2023, they were classified by this report as tier 2. So not fully compliant, but making significant efforts to be compliant with the minimum standards. And what is interesting here is that they point out that the government demonstrated overall increasing efforts compared with the previous reporting period. And these efforts have cooperation with European counterparts, anti-trafficking investigations, despite of the diminished resources and the capacity due to the Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. And also, as we were talking about the fragile state index, it is for this, there was a big difference within the previous years before the war and now. So in the wake of the Russian invasion of February 2022, Ukraine's position in the fragile state index has risen. So before it was 68.6 and now it is 95.9, which is a very big difference, and it puts the countries from the 92nd most fragile state to the 18th. And this is this gives Ukraine the title of most worsened for the year, and it's increased fragility and has affected not only the countries in its vicinities, but as well the states further afield. So this represents well this vulnerability that we can attach within the trafficking in person and these organized crimes within the areas that are in conflict. So as this conflict will, of course, make these areas more vulnerable, which will make it easier for these kind of crimes to happen. And as for the question that was proposed even now, just to go a little bit quick over that so we don't take too much time. Yes, there was. It is possible to see with the war and how it's developing, the way that it can affect other countries in many ways, of course, but also because the border patrol is not as strong, and of course there are, especially internally, the focus is completely other. It becomes easier for these trafficking, not only of persons, but arms, as it was mentioned before, to happen within the borders. So it is, it affects directly, and it should be not only for this reason, but it should be one of the reasons why it would be a top priority. And again, with the displaced people, so with the refugees that are leaving Ukraine, it put these people at risk, and it put Ukrainians that are trying to escape, and obviously not only the ones that are there, but the ones that are trying to escape as potential victims. So it makes a very fragile environment, and this consequently will be a very important fact in order to consider the fragility of and the vulnerability of the people for these crimes. And lastly, we can see here just more general. This is not with from the war years directly, but as said in the beginning, Eastern Europe was one of the main reasons for this attention in the beginning for human trafficking. And we can see that the chart of the detected victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation is very big. So for women and girls, and then for forced labor, majority is male, but then we also have women that are considered. And that is the general. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. And yes.
So thank you very much. You are all really a goldmine of information. And now, if you agree, we have a couple of questions from our viewers. For instance, maybe we can start again from Rafael, and then we can, if someone wants to jump in. Which enforcement and investigatory agencies are diligent in asking identified serious criminals about possible links to non-state armies, which do not? Who is listening to Ukraine? This is a question coming from Mr. Ewan Grant. If someone wants to jump in, wants to answer. Rafael? No one? So I have another question in this case for Morgana. Can you tell us what are the roots of shame for human trafficking from Ukraine, and which countries or regions are involved? And are the measures implemented by the European Union to protect refugees sufficient, in your opinion?
In my opinion, they're not sufficient. It has been increased in the latest years. It has been increased in the imprisonment of perpetrators. So it's something that there has been a pressure for states to have better legislations in this, and Ukraine as well. So Ukraine has been considering these legislations, and it has been monitoring closer, let's say. Of course, not the main focus right now, but not only Ukraine, but every other country has been having a closer attention to this, and the incarceration of perpetrators has been considered in many indexes. So it is something that before the legislation was not very clear about, and it has been improving. However, it is still very gray area. It is very difficult to detect. It is very unreliable as well. Many information, many data on that is unreliable, and we're not completely sure on how to make it more efficient. And it is something that demands not only the control of the state in which it is we're focusing on, let's say, but as well the ones surrounding it, because like we said, it is transnational, so it goes beyond borders, and this cooperation also makes it a lot harder to identify. So yeah, I would say that we can see, especially with all of this refugee crisis that we are having in the past years now, it is not improving. Many refugees, when they are in camps that are not as developed, or they're not able to seek asylum directly in another country, they are even more, just as much victims as they would be if they were in their own country, or if they were still in these areas. So it is something that, in my opinion, it should definitely improve.
Thanks a lot. There is another question from Anne Moisan. The US newspaper, The Washington Post, reported in 2022 that Ukraine's illicit arms market ballooned since the Russian invasion in 2014, not 2022, with a surplus of loose weapons and limited control. What specifically has Ukraine done to address crime and corruption to negate any concerned donor countries now have with the huge influx of weapons? And you can find the question in the Q&A section. If some of yours wants to answer, Oliena, Rafael maybe, or Tetiana.
Maybe I begin.
Yeah.
Do you hear me? Because I have very poor connection.
We can hear you, but we cannot see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. I'd like to say that now the western borders of Ukraine are guarded very heavily. It's impossible to know where the weapons or ammunition in big scales. Besides this, our partners, and first of all, the USA and Defense Department and other institutions has some person who monitor the help, the military help to Ukraine. It's very monitor, and I'd like to say that we live in democratic world, yes, and Washington Post may publish this article and publish in other articles. They are different, and we know that agent of influence are spread in our world. Maybe my colleagues let me.
Yes, and now if Rafael or Tatiana wants to jump in and say something, please, Rafael.
You're muted.
Rafael, sorry, you are muted. You have to switch your micro on. Perfect.
Okay, that's right. Thank you. What claimed really my attention during this session, which was very, very rewarding, enriching to us, all of us, and beneficiaries as well, and victims in the field, on all sides possible. It's clear enough. It's appalling to. It's clear enough that the global flows of weapons made illegal are circulating all over the globe via the several transcontinental criminal networks, be it non-stated armed actors or organized criminal groups. As a sole example, I not focus on the militia transformed base Azov, but not only on the Wagner group, which is operational vastly in Africa as a paramilitary group, as all the globe knows. But we have like safe countries, not safe countries. No country is safe any longer. Sorry, but it's like we have Holland, we have Belgium, we have Southampton port in England, invaded of weaponry from all over the globe from transnational criminal networks. So it's absurd to listen that the people still believe that there's no the reverse influx flows of weapons outside of Ukraine to all over the globe, because it's the war zone. So no one's know what is actually playing during the war zone. Tatiana mentioned very well, I think, we have the gangsters, but we have no precision who is operating like behind the scenes or in front of the scenes or alongside the scenes regionally as well, have the member states. And to sum up, it's very complicated. I'm very sorry, but it started in 2014 in Ukraine, and it's going to last probably, unfortunately, until next year or more months or years. I hope not, but we do not see a focus or anyhow on serious diplomatic efforts for peace building. We see like a rampant, it's instead weapon industry, like to defend the Ukraine, and it's not working well. So have to cope and have to map who are the spoilers. And my claim the attention to finally stop here is to spotlight the most we can, like the illegal ones that we can monitor, because I'm sure that the Interpol, the Europol, I have sources there. They are very aware of the illegal routes, transoceanic routes all over the globe. They reciprocally feeding each other. So it's very sad, but once again, sorry, apologies, and thank you. But it's no longer a Russian invasion problem for Ukraine. It's a global insecurity problem to us all, because the flows of weapons have gone through all over the globe. We have to focus and cope more and more at off states, and also claim the attention of state authorities, state members, be the Vatican, be the BRICS, be the Gulf Cooperation Council, the PRC trying to meet peace tables. We have to focus on diplomatic efforts, not solely and disproportionately on weapon delivery, deployment, which is making it all worse. Even with we're gonna say it finally, like human trafficking, it's a result, and the refugees, it's only get worse. So thank you, and hope it's aggregating. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tatiana. We'd like to hear your answer, please. The floor is yours.
Let me briefly jump into discussion. One of the questions was what have Ukraine done with controlling of weapon trading or trafficking? And Rafael said one of the main words. This word is monitoring, and actually Ukraine is now establishing the register of weapon to control the trafficking all over Ukraine, the incoming flows and outcoming flows. So it is one of the main things that we can do now, because when the state in the war, it is obvious that a large amount of weapon proliferate and infiltrate to the country, both from official sources and through the smuggling ways. So monitoring is our first task. Alberto, if you allow, I'd like to return to your question about Odessa. I think
please. And we have 4 minutes more, so if you can answer, and then we can go to an end.
Yeah, just briefly, I think this is Odessa has always been an outstanding city, and actually the residents of Odessa kindly call the city Mama. It is also known as a pearl by the sea due to its resort capabilities, and of course, Odessa is famous as a huge criminal hub within Black Sea region due to the port and market infrastructure for smuggling. Odessa has its unique criminal ecosystem, active ethnic criminal groups, and strong ties with local government. Actually, the geographical proximity of Odessa region to unrecognized Republic of Transnistria has also raised additional criminal threats. As for the war, the full-scale invasion had a significant destructive impact on the region and its criminal landscape as well. Russian naval blockade and forced cessation of container traffic caused Odessa to lose its role as a smuggling hub in the Black Sea, affecting, first of all, incoming illicit flows. It had forced the criminal groups to look alternative land routes, which was also not so easy because imposed at the beginning of the war checkpoints, curfews, and enhanced patrolling have significantly reduced the mobility of criminal groups. Usually in Odessa, we observed the seasonal fluctuation of crime that was connected with the millions of tourists who are coming to the city in summer. The war also deprived the city of numerous tourists that used to demand illegal goods or services from criminal organizations. What remains almost unchanged is corruption and corruptional practices. Some opportunities for corruption have emerged around the grain corridor and in river ports near the Romanian border. The high-ranking authorities from Ukrainian customs were involved. Corruption practices were also detected at customs in relation of bribery for importation of humanitarian aid, in particularly power generators. Actually, much of the usual criminal activities in Odessa are on hold now, and the future development of organized crime in Odessa as well in the whole Ukraine will largely depend on the timing and outcomes of the war end. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So we have just a couple of minutes. I'd like to thank you all for this extremely interesting webinar, and thank you to our viewers, and see you next time.
Thank you.